And I am going to pull up my slides here, but Tracy, you have to unshare.
Yes, I'm trying to make that happen for you here. Let me grab this.
It's a beautiful day here in Traverse City. It's sunny, about 75 degrees, not raining. Great. So good morning, everyone. John gave you a little bit of my background. Part of it also is that I spent time in a research university, time in a private college, both a four-year and graduate college, and then almost 20 years at a community college. So I have a perspective there. And I also founded a number of businesses in the 1980s during the tech booms. So my job in 20 minutes is to try to get us to understand why innovation and transformation are essential to our future. And I will welcome you to this road, and it is a road. You'll never get off it once you're on. And as you are on this road and as you're going through the sections over the next 3 days, I'd ask you to think of this question. What do you do for whom at what value? And for me, this is a simple value proposition statement. Within it, it also can then provide you with a promise that you're making to the people that you're serving. And throughout the next couple of days, a number of the speakers will talk about a more in-depth way to define your value proposition, but this is increasingly important as we go forward. I will tell you that I believe there's no U-turns on this road. You may have to back up periodically to revisit. It's more cyclical. But the language of returning to normal or returning to what was simply will not serve us well or serve the people that we're working with. Now, COVID-19 has been top of mind for everyone for the last 16 to 18 months. It was and remains a global disruptor. It is a global transformation accelerant. Think of your own organizations, and I'm on the board for a major hospital system that covers about half of the state of Michigan. I can tell you that that hospital did in a matter of about 3 weeks what they had a plan to do over a 2-year period. I know that many colleges, including probably most of yours, converted to a delivery system that in the past you would have taken probably years to get through appropriate channels within. And so question whether or not that acceleration is going to diminish, and I would assert it will not. The most important thing to me in here is I think this yields unprecedented opportunities. And I will tell you, there are people who think I'm crazy when I say that, but there's a reason for that. This first quote from Mary Shelley: "Invention must be humbly admitted, does not consist in creating out of void, but out of chaos." And then the next one: "In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity," with Sun Tao. I've told people this for a long time. The best time to create, innovate, and transform is when systems and structures are in chaos. And in part, that's because creation usually includes destruction. And so if systems are already kind of in a mess, you've removed one potential barrier that allows you to go forward. Now, John mentioned, I think I retired at the very end of 2019. And I can't tell you how many people over the last 18 months have come up to me and said, "Well, you got out just in time." And rather than saying, "Yeah, you're right," my answer was, "Well, maybe not. You know that I like to build things. I like to innovate. I like to transform. And actually, this is the best time for leaders who like to do those types of things because the opportunities are endless." Now, if you go out and look, you will not find a standard definition of innovation nor a standard definition of transformation. But we did a lot of work at Northwestern Michigan College following the work of Gina O'Connor, who's written probably now a half dozen books on 20 years of research into what she called radical innovation. And according to her research, innovation probably is split up something like this pie chart on the right. About 70% of it is incremental, and that incremental innovation is probably going to relate to policies, processes, some products, maybe portions of operations. Then there's 20% that occurs because of disruption, most commonly technical, unlike the COVID disruption. And then the last part is radical, 10%, which are big bet things. They really relate to changing the whole framework of that question that I asked, what do you do for whom at what value? And you can think of it as starting or ending a paradigm. You know, one example of that might be when I was younger, one of my computer companies did work with IBM. IBM was basically in the business of selling and servicing computers. That went away for them. They changed their paradigm, they stopped completely, and they are basically a consulting firm today. And you can find examples like that in countless other areas. So why are these necessary? Why is innovation going to be necessary? Why is transformation going to be necessary? But most important, why is it urgent? It's because of many of the things that Leah talked about in her introduction. And we'll talk about those through the next 3 days. But you can think of everyone in the organization has an opportunity to apply the skills that you're learning over the next 3 days, whether that's the processes, whether it's the products, operation, business models, or culture. So I want to talk about our sector. I do believe that we are not immune from business principles. So I think of higher education as a sector, and I think of us as being part of multiple value chains. Here's a model I'd like you to carry around in your head. This is called the S-curve, or the sigmoid curve, for those of you who are mathematicians. And everything has a life cycle, whether that's a product, whether that's an organization, whether that's a process, whether it's a business model, and it tends to follow 4 component parts. The first is the introduction. And depending what you're looking at, you'll put a different a label on the vertical axis. The reason that this particular curve is there is if I were looking at, for example, the profitability of putting a new product in place, or the cost to actually developing the product, during the introduction period, there's a cost. And so there's this dip. Hopefully then it moves into a growth cycle, then a maturity cycle, and eventually it will decline. Now, the classic processes of innovation would say, if you know this is going to happen, then you need to plan for the next whatever it is. If it's a product, if it's a process, if it's a business model. And the time to do that is when you're still in the growth phase of the prior cycle. There's a lot of examples online if you want to look at this, particularly applied to technology or organizational life. And you'll see the red line here is essentially that same S-curve, but started while you're still operating. Now, that's instructive because we have a big challenge as organizations. It's not as though you can just stop doing everything you're doing. You have to continue providing the services. You have to find ways to do it better, but you also have to devote a certain amount of your time to a future that's not yet been identified. And that's a hard part. You'll notice that this has a very long maturity level on it. And I think what we will find is that's not going to occur in the future. They're going to look more like these S-curves on the right, where they're going to be closer together. The cycle time is going to be shorter. And that means that the urgency to actually take action is going to be there in ways that it might not have been before. So keep this S-curve process in mind, whether you're thinking about a process, a product, an operating system you have, or the overall organization and business model. Now, as I said earlier, I don't believe that we are immune from business realities. And so if you look at how we were set up as community colleges, we were put together basically as the low price and local alternative, okay? And I won't go into the history going back to 1947 after World War II. But this is pretty much carried with us and still has an impact on how we make decisions. We were able to be that low price alternative because of external subsidies at the federal, the state, and the local level. And the result from a business perspective is we have pretty slim margins. Okay, we're not making tons of money. We have balanced budgets, and it's difficult for many to put things into their reserves. So what's happening today? Okay, well, first of all, consider that with this model, it also created what I've termed as a geographically bounded regulated oligopoly. Oligopolies are organizations, think of the airlines, okay? They have certain issues that if one of them does it, they're probably all going to do it. There's kind of a herd mentality, and I would assert that education is like that. It also means that you're trapped by demographics and by your geography. Okay, well, because of this, and we'll talk about a few things in a minute, this low price and the local alternative are under pressure. Okay, we're seeing declining subsidies, although there's a lot of money coming in from the federal grants that are going on right now, but they will not persist, which means the core business model is still going to be subject to this decline. And consequently, what we have applied in the past has tended to be strategies like how do we create more efficiency? How do we become more effective? How do we reduce costs? And how do we increase productivity? Those are all important things, but they're very easy for other people to copy if you figure out a way to do it. So if I think about our past, our historical position as a sector, think of the language that we use. We're place-based, okay? You go to college, okay? We were place-based because we were in a prescribed geographical area that we were allowed to operate in. Time-based, you have a semester, you have an hour. The language describes it. Predominantly, we're there to transfer knowledge. And in fact, the coin of the realm for us was that the government said, you are authorized to certify that learning took place through a transcript, essentially. We're perceived as a public good, funded by the public for the benefit of the public. We had very long development cycles. Most of our organizations and many of the people who work for us are risk averse. We tended to be reactive and focused on access. And we did this in a relatively stable and slowly changing environment. I'm not saying that there weren't changes in our environment, but compared to today, they were relatively slow. Now, here's where I think we're going. We're going more to being able to demonstrate that the content has been exchanged. We've created competencies in people and can assess that. They are able to both synthesize and apply it. Unfortunately, it's much more of a private good. We've shifted a large part of the cost to the student. We have to have short development cycles, be willing to take risk and fail. We have to be proactive, and we have to be focused on the success of the people that we're serving. So I'll go back to this SCurve. Where should we be? Where are we? Where should we be? I would tell you, because of the changes in the underpinnings of our industry and our business cycle, I think we're in a decline state, okay? We're not going to go out of business tomorrow, but it's a decline. We should be here in the growth of a new product. Some of you are, some of us are just starting there. Here's some examples for why I think these issues exist. All of these disruptors were in play before COVID. Demographic declines, changes, the commoditization of what we do. And I think that's exacerbated by COVID-19. When everybody in the country is online, what's your differential advantage? The integration of technology with what we do, political implications, funding challenges, public perceptions about whether or not going to college is even worth it. And I think most importantly now, the very nature of how work happens. Now, everybody, student, employees, community partners operate under this model. We all have expectations. When the realities of what happened don't meet those expectations, there's a gap. And the longer that goes on, the more the gap grows, the more we are less prone to want to engage in the system as it is today. Here's an example in Michigan. This is 2018 data. Gives you an idea of what's going on with demographics, and you should look at your own state. Michigan is a state of 10 million people. It had 116,000 high school seniors in 2018. We rank 17th in the country for the percentage of the population over 65. If you look at these next three categories here, compare the numbers there with the 116,000 per year, that's going to go down, okay? Yet a large part of how we were put together as institutions is aimed at that high school senior, okay? This is frightening when you show it to people, because we will go off this demographic cliff that everybody has talked about if that's all we're focused on is high school seniors. The rest of the country, basically the same things are true on the northern tier, the East Coast. Okay, the growth areas tend to be in the West and Southwest. And there is a tilt towards four-year institutions because of the higher education levels of people within the country, and 20 to 30 years of us telling people that everybody has to have a four-year degree to be successful. The last thing on this slide is most important in terms of demographic growth is not going to get us out of this. So people who think they're going to make their life better by stealing students from someone else, there just aren't enough of the traditional students to go around. We are now in a VUCA environment, and you'll have 2 or 3 of the other presenters talk about this. It's an environment that's volatile, it's uncertain and ambiguous and complex. All words that if you ask most people who work in higher education, they didn't go into higher education for that kind of world, but that's the world we need to help our students be successful in. Now, all you have to do is look around you at other industry sectors and figure out all the ways in which they are either innovating or transforming, and the things that will, again, probably persist into the future. 1 or 2 of the other presenters will go into this in more depth. The changing world of work. Ask yourself, where do you work? How do you work? When do you work? Why do you work? What skill sets are needed to go forward? And how does that integrate with social and technological systems? It's predicted that the #1 job this year in the United States is going to be quitting your job, because people are answering these questions and they don't like the answers as they're applied to the way they used to work. I believe all organizations, people have to commit to ongoing innovation and potential transformation. Those that don't are in peril. Learn from Darwin. Organisms that adapt and change more slowly the environment in which they live perish. So again, what do you do for whom at what value? Answer those within the context of this VUCA world. Maybe stop for a minute and don't even think of yourself as a college, but think of yourself as a talent, economic, and social development agency whose goal is to provide people capacity for social and economic mobility. 3 things I ask people to do. Ask yourself if what you're doing is adding value. If it's yes, do you have to do more, do less, or is it the right amount? If no, why are you doing it? If it's required by regulation or something, then mitigate it so your efforts to accomplish it use as little resources as possible. And if it's not, ask yourself why you're continuing to do it. I believe it's our time. We are uniquely positioned to transform higher ed, not just in the United States, but in other parts of the world, and that is happening. We're consistent innovators. We can be agile and adaptive. We can focus on how hard the work is going to be, or we'll focus on what we always do, which is, what's this going to mean to our learners? And we will listen to them. These are some of the types of things that I read. I spend more time reading non-higher education issues and trying to learn from them. And lastly, I believe innovation keeps you in the game. You have to do it, but transformation lets you change the game. And so if you have any questions, send them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. Thanks for listening, and have a great, great event.
Thank you, Tim. Very impressive information, sometimes a little scary, but lots of opportunity embedded within that. We did have 2 questions come in for you that I'd just like to have you maybe address quickly. The first one is, are you willing to share your slides with folks? So you don't have to answer here. Okay, yes. And then the second one is, could you just give a quick definition of value proposition?
It's basically the promise that you make to the people that you're serving, and it should describe in some fashion how you're going to meet that. So it is those 3 questions. What are you going to do? And there's a whole subset of questions under that. For whom are you going to do it? And what's the value that they're going to get out of it?
Good. Thank you. So moving along, thank you, Tim. I want